I'm only teaching this folk as a doctrine that they have. Now, I'm going to get personal in a minute, but basically legalism says that everybody should have a set of rules that they should abide by. And again, this was contrary to Confucius. It said everybody had his own way, his own law. Everybody should have a set of rules. Now, on a very personal note, I now have come to hate legalism, partly because I grew up with it. And yes, my life was regimented by a set of rules. Do this, and of course I grew up with a whole lot of fear of punishment, repercussion for breaking rules, oftentimes without realizing that I was breaking them. So much for that. But again, legalism is found among every religious group, among Christians, and its tendency is to always be harshly critical of everybody else. In other words, I know how to live, and if you don't live my way, you're wrong. And the other person, well, you're not living my way, so you're wrong. This is legalism. Try to govern harshly, govern by fear, make everybody obey sets of rules. And the Chinese lived under this for a few generations, but finally the dynasty that practiced legalistic beliefs was overthrown. All right. Moving on, Taoism. It's difficult to define what Taoism is. In fact, the Taoism claims to have had a founder, but your book will tell you we're not even sure the founder existed. Now, folk, there have been people who have said that you can't even be sure that Jesus Christ existed, and persons who say you can't be sure Zoroaster existed. But the founder of Taoism, we can't even be sure he existed. But according to Chinese tradition, he lived at the same time as Confucius, and one day he met Confucius, and the two men did not agree on anything. And then the founder of Taoism went his way and was never seen again. Confucius, of course, went on to spread his doctrine more. All right. Taoism taught individualism. In other words, more so than Confucius, Taoism said this doctrine is not a way. It's not a way to eternity. Anyway, they define what it's not first. In fact, they say it's not even a set of definable beliefs. With that to start off with, how do you define it? But some things are clear. It was meant to, all right, I guess number one point I should make is it was meant to add a spiritual dimension that Confucius lacked. All right, in Confucius religion, a mother who lost a 2-year-old child found no comfort in Confucianism because Confucius promised nothing about you'll see that child again, promised nothing about an afterlife. You know, where that child was gone and remained gone for good. That's the end. And a lot of people today believe this. It's over. Taoism promised, oh yes, there is an afterlife, and you and your child that you've lost will be united again. No, Taoism put a spiritual element to Chinese life that Confucius lacked. And folk, you always find this. Every time you get a group that's extremely materialistic, there'll come another group who's extremely spiritual. And the world just goes back and forth. Now, I've lived long enough to observe it. Parents who are religious fanatics oftentimes produce children who are religiously indifferent. Or get the parents who are religiously indifferent, and their children become religious extremists. Any of you observed this to yourself? Yes, oh yes. And a lot of times we go back and forth. And again, the Chinese who did not want to follow Confucius's very materialistic teaching would find some spirituality in Taoism. Now, about 30 years ago, I used to get letters from Taoists, and they would picture this monastery where someone went to and found these very, very young men in their early 20s living in a monastery. But they were told, you think these men are in their 20s, they're actually 120 and 130 years old. And they have discovered the secret to eternal youth. Well, I asked a Chinese man about that one time. He said, yeah, they claim that they're 100 years old, but you never can document their births. So you can take that for what you want. But said the secret lies in proper sexual technique and proper meditation. And you too can find eternal youth if you will join our group. I did not join. But anyway, they were pushing their belief, peddling their religion. Again, they call themselves science. Now, no historian today would call them scientists, but they look on their beliefs as being science. Today, we look on it more as being mysticism or religion of a sort, but again, they call themselves scientists. Again, because Confucius was rigid and led to, and one branch of it led to legalism. Now, something I want to say, there's what, in the case of all religions, there's what the mainstream of the religion teaches, and then there's always branches of it that teach this, that, or the other. And this is true of every one of the world's religions. Confucius himself does not seem to have been a legalist, but he had a group of followers who were. For persons who wanted more freedom and more individualism, as well as more spirituality, Taoism seemed to be the way. All right. Your book moves on to a dynasty that did not last long, the Qin dynasty. Again, in this case, don't worry about the name. That won't be true on the next test. But for this test, don't try to memorize the names of these dynasties yet. But the Qin dynasty is looked on as being the first dynasty that could truly be called an empire, or ruled by an emperor. Of course, the word emperor means a ruler over kings, a ruler over a vast domain that consists of several nations. An emperor is typically either he or his ancestors conquered many groups of people and put them together into one coherent or supposedly smooth running realm. So your book shows a map of the Qin, that actually shows a map of the Qin dynasty and the rulers, the places it ruled. There was one little bitty place there that was a survivor from the Zhou times, but other than that, the Qin had a lot of China, including most of the area, the fertile area, at least between the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers, two of China's main rivers. By the way, these rivers were eventually joined by a canal called the Grand Canal, and the Grand Canal is still in service today. But and as was the case of all these ancient peoples, they tended to locate along the banks of rivers. Under the Qin, and yeah, that's spelled Q-I-N, legalism became the order of the day. And you may notice the Qin only lasted 15 years. But legalism became the order of the day, and people were told you must follow these rules, this set of rules rigidly. And eventually the people rose up and rebelled against it and overthrew it, which is very often what happens in a legalistic society. The people rebel. All right. The Chinese had a problem, as did a lot of other ancient peoples, with barbarians, uncivilized people who'd roam around and live in tents, pitch their tents, and follow the herds. These nomadic peoples would sometimes come into a Chinese home, steal everything they wanted, including their wives and children, and leave whatever they didn't want. So the Chinese had to think, now what do we do about this? So they built the Great Wall. The Great Wall of China is looked on as being one of the wonders of the world. And parts of the Great Wall still stands. Now your book names the emperor who built it. Again, I'm not going to hold you responsible for learning his name. And of course, also, it's my understanding the Great Wall was built over a period of several generations, not just one generation. And it's the quality of it. Some of the workmanship was really sturdy and made of a good, high-quality concrete, and some of it was made of a concrete that would crumble over time and not very great at all. But the Great Wall is like one of ancient China's biggest achievements. Its purpose was to keep out the barbarians. Now, I had a student do a paper on this issue one time and said the Chinese should have, instead of building a Great Wall, should have trained an army and had trained troops patrol the area. And I can't argue with it, except there's a problem with that. Armies just simply cannot be everywhere at once. Armies can be fooled. I mean, a general might think, whoops, I think they're going to attack over here, and the enemy sent a decoy to fool the general into attacking, or end up thinking they're going to attack you. Then the main army sweep around and get in behind and carry off the plunder before the army can react. I mean, keeping an army might be a better solution in today's world, where you have radios, instant communications, telephones, telegraphs, satellites. Hey, keeping a trained army would be a far better solution than building a wall. But that's thinking in 21st century terms. Putting yourself back in their time period, I can't think of anything better they could have done. Now, the Chinese were not the only people to build a wall. In Britain, one of the kings of Britain built a wall also to keep the Welsh, people of Wales, from coming in and stealing from the British. And this wall, part of it still stands. So anyway, the Chinese built a Great Wall. The purpose was to keep out nomadic invaders. The Chinese dealt with this in various ways. Sometimes they invaded the nomadics, but they were difficult to find because they knew how to move. Sometimes they would make treaties with them, and sometimes they'd try to pit one nomadic tribe against another. Say, hey, you know, we know this group has cheated you, and but we can help you. We'll give you armaments and weapons and even a few of our troops, and you can go and get revenge on this other group. Take advantage of the fights among the nomadic peoples. The Qin dynasty fell after about 15 years. And a lot of persons say that it was because of their too strong a legalism. But again, different historians have different opinions. Some say that the Qin was betrayed. Others say that the downfall of these dynasties was inevitable. No dynasty could last indefinitely. Inevitably, you get a ruler on the scene who is unpopular, incapable, and cannot keep order. Farming. The Chinese economy from very early times was based on farming. Particularly, their main crop was rice. And if anyone knows anything about rice growing, it takes a community effort, which is why the extended family became a big, important part of their lives. You were considered family if you were descended from the same great-great-grandparents. After that, they start new families. But in other words, you would live with the descendants of your great-grandparents, your first cousins. Your first cousins, of course, have the same grandparents. Your brothers and sisters would have the same parents. All the way back to the same great-great-grandparents, and you were considered part of the family if you shared the same great-great-grandparents. Again, the purpose of that was largely because only families could work together well enough to grow a crop like rice, where you have to plant it in water, and also it's extremely, all right. You're weighed up to your knees in water, which means if you're not careful, you can get diseases caused by spending too much time in the water. You run a risk of leeches attacking you and sucking the blood out of you, if you know anything about leeches. But the rice crop starts out in about a foot or more of water, and you have to weed those rice plants, weed out the weeds from them while they're still underwater. And again, this takes a lot of work. But the Chinese became rice farmers early. And then they learned, and folk, I mean, this, I don't mean to gross anybody out, they learned to use what they call natural fertilizers. And by natural fertilizer, that's a polite way of saying human waste. They learned that crops would grow better from human waste, which is something that other peoples have tended not to do, but the Chinese did. And again, they had their crops grow really well from this, and the crops grew so well that they were able to develop a civilization because they grew a little bit more than they needed. Now all this was before their population became greater than they could handle. All right.